Good morning. Thank you for inviting Opus Consulting in discussing the possible next steps for the University of Western England after its recent stress and well-being audit. During this proposal, I will briefly discuss what stress and well-being in the workplace actually is, before going into the details of the stress and well-being audit by highlighting certain elements that we believe that you need to focus on. I will then discuss Opus Consulting's approach to the possible project, and then an example of an action plan that we would put in place. So what is stress and well-being in the work? The definition of stress has been developed and discussed in literature for many years now. Lazarus said it was a transactional approach. He said that an individual will appraise on a primary level what the stress means to them before appraising on a secondary level of what they can do about it. This was further developed by Hobno's conservation of resources theory. We also recognize an emotional response by the individual, that the individual is naturally wanting to preserve resources, and any imbalance in these resources will lead to stress and Colligan and Higgins describe stress as the change in one's physical or mental state to workplaces that pose an appraisal, challenge, or threat to that employee. This is all about the individual's perception of a stressor and whether it's negative or positive. The well-being discussion has gone through phases where it was initially discussing the physical harm of health and safety, then it went on to the mental harm of stress and burnout, and now it's discussing a more positive psychology of well-being, the positive aspects of work, of whether these stresses can be seen as a positive and enhancing to the individual. Effectively led to a basic form of split for stress. It can be de-stress, when the individual appraises the stress as negative on their well-being. This could lead to stress, burnout, dissatisfaction of their job, or it could be eustress, where the person deems it as positive. They see it as a enhancement of their well-being. And this could lead to higher worker engagement, higher energy. So this is all from an individual cognitive perspective, but we need to also have a look at the organizational. It's not the individual's responsibility solely to deal with stress and well-being in the workplace. The organization needs to look at itself and say, well, are we doing more? Look at it from the context of the organization. Now, the university is a very complex organization. It'll have various different departments, various different individual personalities, and from an overall perspective, it has now a more commercial attitude to traditional 30, 40 years ago. The potential for work stress has increased with job complexity and competition in the market. This has led to headlines discussing the poor mental health of individuals working in universities. Now, the university's approach, as part of their New Year, New You campaign, with a 77% completion, so it gives a fair understanding of what the organization is like, is to approach it as part of a quantitative data when discussing in respect to the health and safety executives' 6 management standards. Now, these standards are also incorporated in Palmer Cooper Thomas's model of stress. Even though these are individual questions and individual feelings on the audit, the model of stress recognizes that these 6 standards are actually primary sources of stress within the culture of the organization. So you can see that the individual and organization go hand in hand, and you can't separate the two. So the results from these audits, we've decided to take out 4 elements of it, just to explain where we would approach and how we would attack any issues that may be there. So from the faculty's perspective, as you can see on the slide, that the demands responses are significantly lower positive responses in every question, and also role has lower positive responses than UWE overall in every category, but significantly negative variances when discussing resources. This could be linked to the job demand resource model. This suggests that stress is a response to an imbalance between demands on the individual and the resources they have. Now, the demands and resources could be varied from personal to practical, but this is sort of linked to the Hobnaw's conservation of resource theory, where an individual sees an imbalance. They see that the job demands don't meet the resources they have available at that time, whether that's emotional or physical or whatever it may be. But compare the same two standards when it comes to services, and there's completely disparities, complete move in the opposite direction. They say it shows significant more positive responses in every question in the demand standard, although they are feeling a little bit of strain on competing demands, and also there's lower than overall in but significantly positive variances in discussing resources. So there's a big disparity between the two, and this sort of shows the complexity of the organisation. This is in contrast to the faculty. The services are seen well-being as most likely when job resources are high. Even if they face high demands, if they feel like the job resources are high, they can perceive it as positive. And this disparity needs to be discussed. Split out here the support and change elements. So when it comes to the faculties, there's once again significantly lower positive responses when discussing management and communication. This is a similar theme when it comes to change. There are significantly lower positive responses than the UWE overall in every category, and the issue of communication is once again prevalent. This goes back to the discussion of distress and how they are perceiving and appraising these certain elements as negative, and this could lead to negative consequences for the faculty. And this is a large base, so this will have a knock-on effect commercially and also onto the actual customers, the actual students. And there's a disparity when it comes to services. It's gone the other way. The support element is significantly higher responses when discussing management and communication for UWE overall. And there's also, when it comes to change, that they are significantly higher positive responses again. And the issue of communication is prevalent but in a positive way. So we need to find out, is this the individuals perceiving these stresses as enhancing well-being, as eustress, as previously discussed? Or is there certain coping mechanisms that they are using, which maybe the faculties have not got in their resources? So when you're looking at these now, you think, well, we need to find a approach. We need to understand these figures. What Opus Consultants' approach would be is similar to the consultancy cycle. We'd first of all gather information further, more qualitative. We need to have an open discussion with each group and see what disparity is. In an organization as large as a university, there will be microcultures. Maybe the positives from the services can maybe be applied to the faculties, or whether there's certain coping mechanisms and acknowledging the positives in the services that maybe the faculty feel that they don't receive that support. Once you've had these initial consultation with each one of the, maybe each department or just the faculties and services in general, there would then be an evidence-based approach and formulate a plan. Now these will be two-pronged. They'll be primary and secondary interventions. Now the primary intervention is looking at the organization as a whole. It's looking at the sources of these stresses. It's looking at the macro culture rather than the microculture we previously discussed. Then we will then look at the secondary interventions. These interventions at an individual level. These would be interventions such as response management, distress management courses. These are looking at the individuals and how they perceive these stresses, and maybe they be suffering, and there's more of a reactive approach. We need to combine the two. We can't. The literature clearly states that if you just do secondaries, being reactive to these stresses and strains, there's mixed results. First of all, employees may not want to be involved, and they may find themselves too busy, or it just certain things wouldn't work for certain people. There was a recent literature review from Vote Netra Vikas, which is just an actual college setting. And it's just how all these individual stresses may vary, and there may be many different elements to it. And if you just treat the secondary intervention, this is a partial solution. It's not solving the primary source. It is going to be useful for the individual to develop an understanding and coping strategies, but you need to recognize the primary source, which is the organization. So you would need to have a plan of action which has both primary and secondary interventions. When it comes to primary interventions, there's not a huge amount of studies on these. It's a very complex situation, but there's definitely a discussion around there needs to be a multi-model approach. If you have an individual secondary, this could be quite short-lived, but if it's a primary intervention, it could be a long-term solution. It'll be embedded in the culture of the actual organization. When discussing this, Tritcher and Winslow said a multi-model approach, it attacked both the organizational cultural level and the individual perceptive level. And if these work together, given time, it would actually assist in well-being overall and not just be a short-term fix or a partial fix. Once these are as discussed in the action plan shortly, once these primary and secondary interventions are introduced, there needs to be a reviewing solution. There needs to be interim and annual reviews to discuss the positives and negatives of what is occurring. There needs to be a balancing approach here. There will be positives, there will be negatives, but people understand, and if they're involved in this process and they are regularly reviewed, they can see that improvement is happening. If you take a stress audit and do nothing with it, that would be a lot more detrimental than not having the audit at all. So having reviews shows that the organization is trying to change. When it comes after this and to be evaluating the outcomes, you quickly evaluate with a purpose consulting, and then it's further reporting and reflection in a year's time, in 2 or 3 years' time, regarding this process. So I'm going to show you the possible action plan now from Opus. As you can see, there'll be initial information gathering when they talk to the individual organization, parts of the organization, and then it leads to a systems approach which changes the organization as well as the individual resources. And as you can see here, there's a few potential solutions. For example, in demands, there'd be primary solutions about reviewing the current policies and embedding these new procedures to match the way of working. But this also runs alongside the secondary interventions of developing personnel plans, providing priority training. And there's also similar in the role element, where there may be a suitable induction program at a higher level for the primary interventions, but also mindfulness-based interventions as proven by studies of helping the individual cope and appraise the stress in a different way. Having these combined and having these put together, well, embedding the organization, it won't be short term. If it's embedded in the organization, it'll just be natural, it'll just be part of the process. Same then when it comes to support and change, we would want to increase the current average score to the desired average score, and this will be a gradual progression. This will involve primary interventions like introducing work-related stress and emerging concerns as a standard item in meeting, and also on the individual secondary level, when it comes to stress management educational programs, or even gratitude interventions, are recognizing the positives that the individuals do and how this can be applied across the board. You've got to recognize the positives within an organization and how this can be applied to every part of the organization. There's also in the change element, there might be a new system where staff are made aware of the change, like a YAMA system, or key steps of change are discussed in forums confidentially. But there's also an individual level, it could be coping skills training or resilience training. Once this is done, there needs to be bi-monthly discussions and 6-month interims, and then a senior management for primary interventions and line managers for secondary need to discuss with Opus about evaluating, and then maybe an annual stress and well-being audit for a few years. This will take time. Primary interventions will take a lot longer than the secondary ones, but if you want long-term results, you need to combine the two and have this multitude of the two. Please see attached these references.